Greetings, plebeians. My name is Rahim, and today we will be discussing the Pulitzer Prize winner, The Road, by Cormac McCarthy, conceptually and thematically. As I locate the themes of The Road, I will also spare some time to talk about its grammatical flaws and why I actually hate this book. The Road puts us in its catastrophic and nihilistic future with the following lines. When he woke in the woods in the dark and the cold of the night, he'd reach out to touch the child sleeping beside him. Well, that's not creepy at all. Night's dark beyond dark, and the days more grey each one than what had gone before. That might just be the worst introduction I've ever read in my life. The Road's first impression is equivalent of that of urinating in a toilet. It's so uncreative. It's almost as creative as, it was a dark and stormy night. Dark beyond darkness. Seriously? Unfortunately, through these 4 lines, The Road sets the mood for the rest of the book. Mundane talking, nonsensical narration, and some really strange ideas. Now this brings us to the topic. What is The Road about? Well, The Road is about a father and a son walking on a road, well, a metaphorical road, but a road nonetheless. Sometimes they run away from cannibals, sometimes they talk about how grey everything looks. Sometimes the father coughs and interrupts the non-existent story. Sometimes the kid says, "I'm scared, Daddy," like a little twit. Of course, Cormac intended to tell a story of biblical proportions, therefore dealing with themes of divinity and all those other abstract and metaphysical concepts no one usually cares about. So, let's delve into the themes of The Road. The Road uses the post-apocalypse as a backdrop to explore the relationship between a father and a son. The Road's most predominant theme is discussing the relationship between the parent and the child, the relationship they share, the love between them, and the father and his sacrifice, his urge to protect his child. Unfortunately, over the course of 287 pages, there's absolutely no character development, and both of the characters are almost as complex as toilet brushes. The boy in the story is supposed to represent this Christ-like Messiah, the hope for all innocence in the world. He is the last source of happiness and the future of mankind. Unfortunately, this little boy has the personality of a urinal. And what does this proverbial urinal provide us in dialogue? Well, every dialogue follows the specific structure / template within this novel.
Daddy, I'm scared.
Don't be.
Okay.
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 Mankind's next messiah sucks out all the fun from life like a terrible plunger. With imagery of Christ-like people and divinity, the next topic of discussion is, of course, in relation to God and religion and spirituality, nihilism. Dialogues such as, "There is no God, and we are his prophets," and "Where men can't live, gods fare no better," provide us a good sense of desperation and spiritual degradation within this land. The Road is not focused on survival in the sense of physicality, but rather focused on survival of the soul. Due to spiritual degradation, humanity has also degraded and reached a point of decadence. Loss of faith is equal to loss of health. As the father loses more faith, he also loses health within him. The boy, who, unlike the father, is full of faith and morality, does not lose himself in the same sense, and is rather hopeful of humanity. Of course, due to Cormac's brilliance, such brilliant pieces of dialogue and compelling discussions are overshadowed by literary bird feces such as, "He took out the plastic bottle of water and unscrewed the cap and held it out, and the boy came and took it and stood drinking. He lowered the bottle and got his breath, and he sat in the road and crossed his legs and drank again. Then he handed the bottle back, and the man drank and screwed the cap back on and rummaged through the pack. They ate a can of white beans, passing it between them. and he threw the empty tin into the woods. Then they set out down the road again. Poetry. Simplistic writing is good and all, but the road suffers through extreme inconsistency, with narration such as, "They pressed on. It was very, very cold." Seriously? The word very is despised by writers. The 101 of writing is never use very, because very, the word very, is completely satanic in all senses, defying all things beautiful and contradicting all that is good. Therefore, never use very. But Cormac, he literally litters his book with the word very repeated many times. Of course, discussing a relationship between a father and son, we must also talk about the broader picture, which the road does as well. The road talks about human interaction and how people depend on one another, and it uses the concept of cannibalism to show how much humanity relies on each other to go on surviving. Unfortunately, these scenes of cannibalism progress the non-existent story within the road. You see, the road rejects the narrative structure set by Plato and Aristotle in favor of being experimental, but it just ends up being mundane and jaded, with layers of complete boredom infesting it. In this novel, everything is grey, ashen, covered in dust, or dead, or dead, or dead. Everything is dead! McCarthy shows as much lyrical diversity as a f***ing math textbook. The writing is strictly representational, describing scenes of gore and violence which are supposed to be horrifying, like it's some sort of doctor's checklist. Blood and gore? Check! Burning corpses? Check! Impaled corpses? Check! Baby being eaten alive? Check! Then some critics have the gall to call this book disturbing, forgetting the fact that 120 Days by Marquis de Sade exists. McCarthy is as lyrical as Cannibal Corpse in the representation of violence. Actually, I'd go as far as to say Cannibal Corpse disturbs me more than this book. Of course, let's also not forget, McCarthy calls a lamp a slut. Another compelling theme within The Road is a conversation on humanity's self-destructive tendencies. The corruption that happened to the land might have happened for whatever inexplicable reason, but it is not enforced by nature or machines. It is rather enforced by mankind and their primal impulses to kill one another. The 100 nights they sat up debating the pros and cons of self-destruction, with the earnestness of philosophers chained to a madhouse wall. In this sense, self-destruction is not self-harm, but rather the desire to keep surviving, and the desire to keep living and suffering is in itself self-destructive. Also, this novel makes me want to do some self-destruction myself. The character motivations in the novel are almost as exciting as waking up in the morning and attending high school. Of course, fighting through the singular expression characters, there's a whole other battle with McCarthy and his inconsistent writing style. He shoved the pistol in his belt and slung the knapsack over his shoulder and picked up the boy and turned him around and lifted him over his head and set him on his shoulders and set off the roadway at a dead run, holding the boy's knees, then clutching his forehead, covered with gore and mute as a stone. That was one sentence. That was one sentence. That sentence was as eloquent as a screaming koala. Sentences like these read like some sort of textual Frankenstein monster. Of course, let's also not forget McCarthy's collection of craptastic metaphors such as query, how does the never to be differ from what never was? And people sitting on the sidewalk in the dawn half immolate and smoking in their clothes like failed secretarian suicides. What the Contextually, McCarthy was blessed with the idea of this wonderful novel when he went to Mexico with his son. Like any other rational human being, he imagined how Mexico would look like 50 years from now. Unfortunately, 50 years from now, Mexico looks like this grey wasteland of cannibalistic, holocaustic impulses within man. McCarthy also noticed a distance between him and his son, and the lack of a proper relationship, and he tried to portray that within The Road. "Who is it?" said the boy. "I don't know. Who is anybody?" That is totally how a dad and his son talk, isn't it? It's almost like watching two robots trying to communicate with one another. Of course, one may accuse me of being the shameful contrarian, which I might possibly be, but the truth of the matter is, The Road presents some extremely compelling themes about humanity and our relationship with spirituality and our relationship with other people. How much we're dependent on people to go on, and how much we're dependent on spirituality to keep going on in life. How much we look towards something bigger than us to motivate us in life. Unfortunately, The Road, for me, reads like a second grader's essay. Therefore, thank you for joining me for this intelligent discourse on The Road. I will see you never again. Thank you. Terrible textual Go again. Let's delete this shit. Let's restart.
We're good.
Mother.
Careful, continue.
Okay.